Hello and welcome to MASHmouth, a podcast covering every single episode of the hit 1970s sitcom MASH. I'm Vanessa.
And I'm Ethan.
Ethan, how are you today?
I'm doing pretty okay. How are you, Vanessa?
I'm well, thank you. I think that we're always just going to be okay when we're talking about MASH. Regardless of anything else that's going on, it's just fun to talk about MASH together, so it makes us happy.
MASH makes us okay. Our baseline is we're fine.
Okay.
In theory, we don't have to ever ask each other how we're doing. But, maybe one day I'll come in and be like, you know what? Had a terrible day. This is all my problems, and just air them out on mic for the world to hear. And then we'll talk about MASH and be like, you know what? Today was actually pretty okay.
That would be fun. So today, this episode is titled Chief Surgeon Who. It's the 4th episode of the series. In this episode, Hawkeye is appointed chief surgeon of the unit. And of course, Frank doesn't like that. He has a little bit of a hissy fit freak out. And he calls a general to the camp to inspect and scrutinize Hawkeye's kind of unconventional style of work and surgery. So what did you think about this episode right off the bat?
This episode was really fun. I like this one. Like I talked about with the last episode, my kind of major problem with that one, and like major in big finger quotes, is that like that story didn't necessarily have to be on the army base, and this was a very army base centric story. For me, it kind of works more in line with like how I see the show. Mm-hmm. This one was really fun. It had some good comedy and good lines. Vanessa, what did you think of it?
Yeah, I really liked this episode. It put the situation comedy in sitcom for me. That's how I described it when I was watching it. That's the first thing that came to mind. It was a very big comedy of errors, especially, as we get into the episode with the general trying to find Henry. That was really funny. I liked that a lot. And
you get to see a lot of the characters and just how they all kind of interact at night when they're not working. And that made this episode very fun, is that you're just running into all of these people doing these very non-army things over the course of this night. I also have to say, again, this episode looked beautiful. Just the lighting in the night and how it's lit in the tents. Very impressive for the time. I thought it looked very nice.
Yeah, something that's really interesting about MASH was shot not on a set. It was shot outside and in these tents and stuff like that. So it was, I think that it's really well done for not being on a traditional studio. Well shot, well lit, just really well done, especially for the 1970s, I feel.
Yeah, and like we've talked about before, on Hulu and various streaming services, you get the show in HD, and it was shot on 35 millimeter film, so it looks very nice. Just the general look of it is oh, this is a nice looking show, and it's neat to see. So do you have any highlights?
My favorite line of this show was a line that really made me just laugh out loud, is when the general is kind of yelling at Hawkeye. He's telling him that he's messing up and stuff like this. He goes to leave and he goes he's like, you haven't heard the last of this. And Hawkeye goes very offhand, I haven't heard the first of it. It made me laugh so hard.
There was a lot of good interactions with that scene. Is the general's brought down by Frank and Major Houlihan to kind of show that Hawkeye is not qualified for the job of chief surgeon. So he comes in and kind of expects Hawkeye to not be qualified, and at that moment he's playing poker, and Hawkeye is very much giving him nothing, not even arguing with him, just won't engage with him on any level other than, hey, I'm trying to play poker here, please leave me alone. So that whole sequence of interactions with them and just how Hawkeye is constantly brushing him off was really funny.
Yeah, I really liked that. Yeah, what was your favorite line?
My favorite line is a bit difficult to deliver, but it was right at the beginning. They're all in the swamp and they're making gin and just drinking and talking about martinis. And Frank is like, oh, don't you have anything better to do than swill gin? And Hawkeye responds swill gin? I have sipped gin. I have lapped gin. I have taken gin intravenously, but I have never swilled, good sir. Good line. Good interaction. And that was like right at the beginning. That was one of the first scenes in the episode, and was like, all right, this is going to be a good one.
Yeah, I liked that too. Getting into a little bit more of the meat of the episode, I thought it was really interesting and really fun to see the juxtaposition of Hawkeye and Frank just as characters and as like what they represent in the army. Frank, of course, he thinks that he is this amazing surgeon, and it's kind of established that he's not the best surgeon. He's not the best doctor.
He had a $35,000 house and 2 cars, though. So, you know, he's doing pretty all right for himself in the 1950s.
$35,000, by the way, is about $350,000 today. Just so we all know.
I was gonna say, that's actually a nice house. Whoa.
In the episode, he's writing to his patients, kind of making himself out to be this amazing doctor, this amazing surgeon, saving all these people's lives, and this war hero. And Hawkeye is just like, wow, this is ridiculous. So it's really funny. And then, of course, Hawkeye is given the position of chief surgeon. And Frank is like, I can't believe this. And he goes to Henry with, this list of grievances against Hawkeye that, he doesn't salute him and this and that and the other thing. And of course, like, Hawkeye doesn't want to be there. Hawkeye doesn't take it seriously. I mean, he takes his job seriously as a doctor, right? But he doesn't take the army seriously at all. And I feel like in this episode, it's really juxtaposed between like Frank, who wants all this notoriety and is not the best doctor, versus Hawkeye, who establishes a really good surgeon, a great doctor, who is just like, let me go home.
This is a good kind of exploration of their dynamic. One thing that I like about Hawkeye in relationship to Burns is that Hawkeye doesn't have any ego, like, at all. Like, he is good and he knows it, but he doesn't try to impress anyone with it. It's just his job. One of the interactions in this episode was Frank says, like, I have, the big house and the cars, and you, when you were drafted, you were still working in the hospital. And Hawkeye just responds like, oh yeah, God forbid that a doctor work at the hospital. Like, yeah, of course, Frank, he's a doctor. Where else is he like supposed to work? I know it probably meant like, private practice or something, where it's like being a big guy, but like Hawkeye is very much established to be just a working guy, and it's his job to do what he does, and he's not very high and mighty about it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I would agree with that assessment of him for sure. I think that, well, definitely he maintains he maintains that aspect of himself throughout the entire show of like, I'm doing my job. I'm saving lives. Just let me do this and let me go home. That's all I want. And he doesn't want, any responsibilities other than saving lives. He doesn't want the titles. He doesn't want the rank. He doesn't care about the regular army aspect of what he's doing. He just wants to save lives and he just wants to go home. And I think that's quite admirable.
It's at the core of his character, I think. Like, if that deviated over time, I think the show would be infinitely worse. If, like, suddenly Hawkeye was like, I'm the best, it would make him infinitely less cool and charming. Because, like, anybody who is the best but proclaims themselves to be the best, infinitely, like, not as cool as before.
And for sure, later in this series, of course, his ego gets checked a couple of times, in some episodes later on. And it's a very, like, good, it's a good thing. Obviously, in these early episodes, he doesn't have any kind of ego, like you said. But later on, when there's, like, issues or anything like that, it gets checked and it grounds him pretty fast. It's always really good. But so I wanted to get into so after Hawkeye is awarded, I guess, or appointed chief surgeon, they throw a party, and I really loved this party because it it represented to me also, like, something great about Hawkeye's character is that even though he doesn't want he doesn't want the chief surgeon position, because even Henry said he's like, oh, on top of his regular responsibilities, he's going to be responsible for this, all this other stuff. And of course, Hawkeye doesn't want it, like we just said, but he doesn't miss the opportunity to, like, celebrate the position in the most ridiculous way possible. He's in a bathrobe, he's in a cowboy hat. It's, like, ridiculous. Everyone's having a fun time. And to me, it's just like any excuse to drink and party and kind of forget the reality of their situation and, like, where they are for any short amount of time. He'll do it. He'll take it just to, you know, feel kind of normal again. And I really liked that about this whole goofy little party situation.
Yes, and that, I think, is the best illustration of, like, why Frank is so wrong in this episode.
Mm-hmm.
They need to blow off steam. They need to be just chill out sometimes and just relax with each other and be friendly with one another. And, like, it's kind of obnoxious that Frank doesn't see that. Like, I don't know what Frank, like, wants from the military base, if he wants it to just be professional all the time. Because I think with anybody that would be, like, super draining. And, like, the party itself was very funny as well, like, with a Radar coming in and giving him, like, a beach ball and a toilet plunger and being like, these are your weapons of a mighty steed. And it's very just cute and fun and genuine. Like, it felt very genuine.
Yeah, I agree. It was just, in this episode, a lot they show the humanity side of, you know, people in a war and, like, you know, at the unit and stuff like that, their humanity. And the show does a great job of this throughout the series, but in this episode, you kind of see it. This party scene was definitely one of those kind of humanity aspects of the show.
And then when the general shows up and you get to see just kind of everybody hanging out at night, just kind of what they're doing when they're off duty, made this episode, like, even more fun. Probably my favorite scene in this was when he goes to Henry's office and just Radar's sitting there drinking a giant whatever. I'm not sure exactly what it was, but he was drinking something and, like, smoking a cigar just at Henry's desk. And like I've mentioned before, like, the image of Radar in my head is like the kid with the teddy bear. So, like, in these early episodes, it's so fun to see my preconceptions be challenged on him and be like, oh, he is a bit more of like a cool, rebellious guy than the softy that I kind of pictured him as.
Yeah, for sure. That was really funny. And I loved just all, like, the mishaps along the way of General Barker trying to find Henry and, you know, chew him out basically for appointing Hawkeye as chief surgeon and stuff like that. He walks in on Trapper and Hawkeye playing poker, you know, Radar and the cigars, and Margaret and Frank sneaking around, which is another thing too. It's like Frank is so, like, wants everything
Frank's
to be professional. Yeah, exactly. He's so hypocritical and it's so annoying. And when he finally gets to Henry, he starts digging up worms. Or Henry's been digging up worms to go fishing. Oh my god, that was too much.
This episode we meet Klinger, who becomes such a big character in the show. And he's just kind of like a throwaway joke in this one. So fun to see kind of how these seeds are planted, even if it wasn't intentional. Like, I don't know if they were planning to bring Klinger back in, like, a meaningful way. What happens is, like, the general guy is just trying to find Henry, and he's running into everyone. He, like, ran into a guy with, like, a coat on, and when he's walking away, like, you see, like, a woman, like, wrapped around in that coat with her legs showing. And then, like, right after that, Klinger shows up and he's wearing a dress and he's like, oh, and they don't really acknowledge it. He's just like, oh, that's weird.
Yeah, I thought it was really funny. So Klinger is this guy in the army who got drafted, wanted a Section 8, which is the dismissal, I guess, from the army saying that you are mentally impaired, like crazy, I guess. And he goes to about achieving this Section 8 by dressing as a woman and completely like owning he's out of uniform all the time. In this episode, he's in a woman's uniform. I really thought it was funny that the general kind of was like, Klinger is still going for that Section 8. Like everyone apparently knows that Klinger is the guy who's like trying to get out of the army by dressing as a woman, and no one's buying it. It's really funny.
And just how they're not fazed by it at all.
Yeah.
Right after that scene when he does find Henry, the general says like, "Oh, are you aware that one of your men is wearing a skirt?" And Henry just responds like, "Good thing he has the legs for it."
That was another one of my favorite lines.
They don't care at all.
Yeah.
And it's so funny to see in this nearly 50-year-old show. And obviously, like, it's a joke and, like, it's not meant to be taken as, like, a progressive thing. But it is interesting to see how, like, they treated kind of gender nonconformity as, like, oh, it's fine, don't worry about it. Even if it is kind of, like, presented as a joke, it was still very, like, this is just who he is.
Yeah, this is just what he's doing at this point. So, like, we're not going to acknowledge it. It's not good. It's not bad. This is just how it is. I really like that. And I do think that that's funny that it's... I didn't even think about that because Klinger is such a like a staple in the show for me that I don't know if they were planning on bringing him back or if he was a one-off, but this is his first appearance in the show, and he does come back as a recurring character for most of the show and then a main character near the end, and I think that that's great.
Klinger is great. He's got a lot of good moments. Even in the little bit of the show I've seen, he sticks out as just a very notable character.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know that you love Where Everybody Goes, and I'm sure he's gonna get some development as it goes on. So I'm very excited. We have to do like a fashion update when he becomes like a regular character. We have to like criticize his outfits.
That would be so fun because he wears some crazy outfits. It's amazing. So the reason that this general is going to find Henry to kind of scold him or yell at him or whatever he's gonna do, I guess press charges against Hawkeye for insubordination, something, is because Frank and Margaret called General Barker down to the MASH unit because they said, oh, well, there's a patient who has been sitting and waiting to be operated on for a few hours now. And your chief, like the chief surgeon here, he's playing poker, he's drinking, like all this kind of stuff. He's not drinking, like it's very, very well established that he's just playing poker. He's not inebriated when he operates. So the general says to Hawkeye, go operate. What are you doing right now? Like, this is an order, go operate. And Hawkeye says, no, I'm not operating right now because the patient isn't stable enough to operate on. Basically, like, I know what I'm doing here, and I'm not going to operate on this kid and then potentially lose him on the operating table because some general who thinks he knows better than me is telling me that I need to operate.
What makes that whole interaction great is that it's not even an argument. He's just not engaging with him at all. Just giving him nothing and not going off of like any of his energy. He's just like, I'm playing poker. I know what I'm doing. I'm just waiting for this kid to be ready. Rather than like, you listen here, mister. He's just so casual about it, and it does give like a lot of confidence to this character.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as we were talking about the juxtaposition of Frank and Hawkeye and kind of what they represent in the army and the military in general. And Hawkeye, I think Hawkeye's kind of, I guess you'd call it insubordination or like unwillingness to really take orders from this general who thinks he knows more. So what I think is great about this part in particular is that it shows Hawkeye's character and that Hawkeye kind of represents this pushback to the military in the show and stuff like that. And it kind of highlights this hypocritical kind of aspect, I guess, to, leadership and whatnot in the military. So at this point in the show, Hawkeye has schooled two generals and he's gotten out of trouble by being a good surgeon and doing his job, because in this episode, he does end up operating on the patient and the general assists in the operation, and Hawkeye kind of just like wows him by being being a good doctor, being thorough and smart and stuff like that. It just goes to show that you don't have to do everything by the book. Like you're not not everyone in the military who has the general status knows more than, say, like a captain who is the chief surgeon. Like, he's a chief surgeon for a reason. And I just thought that was really cool. Like, you see, like we talked about humanity and whatnot as well. Like, you see these people being humans, but also like they're really good at what they do still.
Exactly, because the whole conflict of this episode is that Frank is mad that somebody with a lower rank was given a higher position than he has, but like objectively Hawkeye is the better surgeon.
Yeah.
He should be the chief or the chief surgeon of this unit regardless of rank. Again, how they criticize and comment on the military, it's never like very foot stompy. At least not yet. But there is very strong sense of the military doesn't necessarily need to have this kind of tone to it.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And like, I think that this episode highlights, even though Hawkeye is unconventional, is not regular army, is not professional when it comes to his place in the army and the military in general, he is still the best person. That's like, he's like the best surgeon. He's still keeping people alive. He's the best at keeping people alive. And that's the point of him being there, regardless of the rank and the titles and the generals and the this and the that and the other thing. He's the best at keeping people alive. And as a doctor in the army, that's what he's there for. So, and even General Barker kind of acknowledges that. He tells Henry at the end, don't call me. I don't want to be called here unless you have an actual problem with the unit. So even though he stumbled upon all these things, Klinger in a dress, Radar smoking the cigars at Henry's desk, Hawkeye being, just himself, he still didn't see that as enough of a problem that he had to come down hard on Henry, because at the end of the day, they were saving people, and that's what they're there to do.
Yeah. Good episode. Quality program, let me tell you. I'm very interested when we're gonna hit a bad episode. It's gonna be something fun to deal with.
Yeah, for sure.
So one thing that I wanted to mention, and it's kind of out of or it's not related to what we've been talking about, but it's never registered to me before that Hawkeye's name is Benjamin Franklin Pierce.
BF Pierce.
It's not ever stated as a joke, that is just his name, but I do find it funny that his name is Benjamin Franklin.
I know, I like that too. And his nickname comes from a book called The Last of the Mohicans. It's actually addressed in later episodes that he said, my dad called me Hawkeye because The Last of the Mohicans was his favorite book, and the main character in that, his name is Hawkeye. So I thought that was really interesting too.
I knew about The Last Mohican thing. Do you have any final thoughts or miscellaneous thoughts?
So this is the last scene of the episode. They're in the OR again, and Hawkeye is kind of not showing off intentionally, but it's shown that Hawkeye knows what he's doing. He was the right choice for chief surgeon. It's kind of punctuating that. And Frank asks for help from Hawkeye.
Yes, I was going to mention this, but I kind of forgot about it.
It's really sweet. I don't like Frank a lot throughout the show, but this is one of the times that I kind of did like Frank. So Hawkeye and Frank kind of put their hatred for each other aside at that moment, and this also goes into this theme of the show that no matter what, the wounded are the most important. These soldiers, and getting them out alive is the most important thing. Frank asks for help and kind of acknowledges that Hawkeye can help him and he needs the help. And Hawkeye doesn't make any kind of snide, really joke about it. He is just like, all right, I'm ready. And he's also kind of acknowledging too that Frank's here. Frank's a doctor. They need Frank as much as they don't like Frank, as much as he's not the best doctor. Hawkeye was still acknowledging him in that moment, he's saving lives too, and he's not too proud to ask for help to save a life. So I really liked that end.
Yes, it was a good closer because, everything is so sitcom-y that you do forget, these are people that are saving real human beings in these situations, and just having that resolve with, we're professionals here. We can have our disagreements and we can have our little sitcom adventures, but when we're in the operating room, that does all end because we do need each other like very fundamentally as doctors. Good episode. Still very impressed at how like solid the show is so early on in its run.
Going back and watching the first few episodes of this show, I am also really impressed because like I said, I haven't seen it in a while, but usually the first few episodes of a sitcom, especially back when this was filmed, aren't the best, and usually it's later on that is like the best of the show. But even so, these are really, really good episodes, and I'm really enjoying them, and I can't wait to watch the next episode.
I know. Even nowadays, like, I feel most sitcoms, like full season 22 episode sitcoms just on network TV, a lot of them are great, but they don't get good until like halfway through the season, when everybody's kind of adjusted to each other and the writers know how to write for the characters. And maybe it helps that this show is based on a book and a pre-existing movie, so they're not like inventing them out of whole cloth. They're kind of taking these existing characters and adapting them, to TV. But I think I'll continue to say that I'm still very impressed at how familiar everything already feels, where it's like the characters have existed for a long time. They didn't begin existing when the show started. They have this history. They have this chemistry with each other.
Yeah, I was wondering if I felt that, because I completely agree with you. I 100% back everything that you just said, especially about the characters like feeling like they existed beyond or like before the first episode of this show. I thought that was just me because I've seen the show so many times and I'm so well like familiarized with these characters. But I'm glad to know that it's just because the show is just well done. It's just a well done show. So we're justified in really liking it.
Alan Alda's still as charming as ever 50 years later. Don't worry about it.
Yes. So I think that just about wraps up the episode. We just wanted to give some thanks to Jacob Furibalco for being our technical consultant, my sister Melissa for the cover art, and of course our listeners. As of the recording of this podcast, we don't have our music picked out. So when we do, it'll be linked in the description. You can also follow us on social media at Valiantly Off Balance, Ethan Was Cool, and Vanessa and Unvanessary, also linked in the description.
You got your own Instagram wrong.
I know. And until next time, relax and soak your feet in a bedpan. Goodbye, farewell, and amen.
Bye, everybody.